let's start with the faculty member who is leading our playwriting workshop this year. Alfaro. Luis is an associate professor at the USC School of Dramatic Arts. He is a Chicano writer-performer known for his work in poetry, theater, short stories, performance, and journalist. He is the first ever resident playwright of the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, courtesy of the Andrew Mellon Foundation. He is a producer, director who spent 10 years at the Mark J. Performance as an associate producer and the director of the new play development and co-director of the Latino Theater Initiative. All right.
Good evening. I knew I was going to start. This is like the summer camp of a hell of my youth, right? Where it's like Alfaro, A. Oh, okay, so I thought I would read something from, so you know I write plays, and I'm working on an adaptation of Medea that I've been doing for a few years around the country, and I'm going to do it next to the Public Theater in New York, so I'm resetting. So please come out next year so the public can see it. So in the middle of this play, you kind of hear the story of what happens to Medea, in my case, and her husband Jason Hasson, and their son Akan, and they have a woman who travels with them named Tita. And so this is the story of their journey, but this is also the story of my family. My family's real story. Is it Frank sitting in the front row? Oh my God. Okay, could I give myself any more pressure? But to say that there's like a literary legend in our communities? God bless you. Okay, here we go. 4 years ago, on a farm in Zamora, she wakes me. Vámonos. She says, and off we go to this America. We walk to the edge of the farm, the four of us. Medea, Hasson, el niño Akan, y yo. Sleepy and confused, I say, why we leave now? No answer. Barely anything we own between all of us. We leave it all behind. We must go. I wear mis tenis, some water, food, and a change of clothes. That's todo. Hasson says, don't worry. I've done it before. It's easy. A truck pulls up. Old and beaten like me. No window, no door, just a big box. A truck for car parts and dead animals, and still we get in. Two men stand and look at us. They are like us, but they are also them, narcos, killers of our country. They run everything now. We lie to ourselves. We will carry something for them. That is why this journey is so cheap, but still more than we can afford. Hasson pays like we are getting on a bus, but this is no bus. 2 days, the driver says. I look at Medea. She is more determined than I have ever seen her. The four of us join two young men looking for work. Juan Felipe from our town and a quiet man from Morelia. I also see an old man from Guatemala holding a Bible. He is already tired, traveled so far. I look at him and worry, but I worry more for Akan. We pray for a safe trip. A young girl runs up at the last minute, darker than all of us, on her way to Arizona. She is alone. I say, sit with me. The driver says, don't worry, I won't abandon you. We don't know him, and I don't understand why we would go in the middle of the night, but this is how it is done. The road is full of bumps. We bounce around for hours. Filled with fear and dread, the driver sings to himself and perspires. We are hot, sweating like animals and burning up, no air in the back. I can feel that we are hiding our desperation. Please, God, let the driver know what he is doing. The old man holds his Bible tightly. The girl is afraid, but tries not to show it. We talk, look at each other, smile, try to distract. And slowly the heat and the sweat quiets us. So hard not to know anything. We take small breaths in silence. All day, we are moving, the endless hours. We stop for a rest and the driver opens the door. We are all surprised. It is still light out. Our sense of time is gone. The driver tells us we are going into the desert. We are near the border. Stay calm if we get stopped. I will bribe the patrol to let us go. This is going to be the hardest part, to drink water. Even if I cannot see it, I can feel it, the desert. We are all exhausted and struggling for breath. You can see everyone's chest and stomach up and down, trying to find and hold as little air as possible. Maybe this is what the narcos do. They kill you before you arrive. I didn't even bring a feather, an offering, protection. I'm such a fool. Time passes, becomes desperation. We whimper. Then the quiet man from Morelia pounds his fist on the wall of the truck. The driver stops, unhooks the door. It opens widely. A gasp. We all breathe in the air. The man from Morelia jumps off the truck. I'm done, he says. It's not worth it. He starts walking into the desert. He screams to us, I have a terrible feeling. Be careful. 7 of us remain. The door bolts shut. We drive and drive, the only hope knowing it has an end. Panic, no air. We find small holes in the floor of the truck. We lie down and stick our noses and mouths on the tiny openings, like pigs, cows off to slaughter. You can hear us gasping for air. I don't know how much longer. Then suddenly, the truck brakes quickly. We are quiet and trying to hear. The doors open. It is night. Standing and staring at us are soldiers from our country. They look at us. They are short, dark, and in their green fatigues. They hold guns and rifles across their shoulders. They don't say anything. Suddenly, 2 jump in, grabbing the young girl. I try to hold on to her, but one of the soldiers slaps me across the face. She screams, Zahala, I shout. They pull her out of the truck. She is wild in her desperation. I can see 3 of them dragging her off into the darkness of the desert. Her muffled screams unbearable. And then it stops. We wait and wait, unsure of what to do. Do we run? And then without warning, they return. To grab Medea, who doesn't scream. She tries to hold her ground. Hassan, Akan, and I hold on to her. A soldier holds a gun to Hassan's face. He is crying. I try to push them away, but one points a gun towards Akan's head. We don't know what to do. I can't let go of Medea. Finally, Hassan, struggling between tears, says, Medea, por favor. We wait. They do what men do, and then they leave them out in the desert. After a while, you can hear drunken laughter. The men come back with their flashlights. They look in the truck again. One of the soldiers gives a nod, and Hassan and the other man run out into the desert. Meanwhile, the leader, who is a boy, jumps onto the truck. He moves towards Akan. I stand in front of him. He laughs at me drunkenly. You are too old for me, vieja. I raise my hand. 2 soldiers draw their guns and I scream, Amazin! I raise my hand and it goes back 1,000 years. His spirit understands. I don't take my eyes off of him. I am eating his heart and he knows it. Lenmo tonatin. I have become a serpent. I show him my teeth. His eyes widen in fear. Quizás. He is shaken, unnerved, but still the leader. He feigns a laugh and jumps off the truck. The soldiers slash the tires of the truck. They take the narcos merchandise and they leave. Hassan returns, holding Medea softly. She is in shock. The other man has the young girl over his shoulder. She is now a carcass. No one weeps. I sing to Akan softly. Cucurucucu, paloma. Cucurucucu, no llores. He never lets go of my hand. We bury the girl in the desert. At least she gets rest. We get the old man up and he lays his Bible on her. I look at the moon. La soclamatli. I go out into the desert and I find our herbs and I make a concoction. Medea drinks it. It kills the soldiers inside of her. Morning comes, we begin to walk. We walk for hours without talking or even looking at each other. The morning dew evaporates into thirsty afternoon. A lizard scrambles. To walk in the desert is to walk everywhere and nowhere. But after a while, it is clear. There is no sign, no line, no welcome. We are in the other America. Thank you.
Thank you. I would now like to bring to the stage the faculty member for the poetry workshop. Ryka is the author of Seasonal Velocities, A Hilo Song, and Why Dust Shall Never Settle Upon This Soul. She was honored by the California State Senate for extraordinary commitment to the visibility and well-being of transgender people. She's a two-time Lambda Literary Award finalist, winner of the Eli Coppola Chapbook Contest, and the Corson Bishop Poetry Prize. She is an MFA in Creative Writing from Cornell University and is the recipient of a University Award from the Academy of American Poets. She's also a former national judo champion. She's also a former national judo champion and the founder of the International Transgender Martial Arts Alliance.
Yeah, she is.
All right. She's a professor of business at Santa Monica College.
I'm just going to represent. It really kind of feels cool to be like the first trans woman of color to lead the poetry workshop. So. The one caveat on this, I've been working, my next book is actually a novel, so I'm reading some poetry from my last book. And I was selecting this. I really, really love my poetry cohort, and this is for y'all. And also just special congratulations to Ariel.
No.
Yes. I'm not going to tell them why, because that's for you to give the news to. But in case you want to know why, I am so proud of this one. You can talk to her over some wine. So I'm going to read just a short segment from the middle part of Why Dust Shall Never Settle Upon This Soul. What can one do when brilliant friends who remain brilliant leave? The Egyptian astrologer incanting psalms for forgotten souls, gone. The space-time composer with pocket universe of beat match LEDs, away. The Enlightenment weaver threading certain and unfallen yarns, never to look back. What can one do when those who taste prophecy in a teaspoon, feel symphonies in the Van Nuys cul-de-sac, hear colors amongst the coldest February gray, at a change in my pronoun, find nothing worth another thought? Grab the mic, cue the karaoke. What the fuck can this be but a song? By now, I was supposed to have mall walk to arthritic elderhood, Tia Ryka, perched upon padded chair to speak lovingly of arena, fang, fuck, the downtown lock with the best cocaine, peanuts where Sinead O'Connor hid between an inside wall and her outside bodyguard, of cinematic illusions, the drag shows at the old Queen Mary, cutting lines of hardest house as the gorgeous ones dance, or sip vodka tonics, or give head in lime green restroom stalls. Of how the strobe lights knew to stop at the makeup and glitter and leave us weary as the dead morning streets when the mockingbirds sang and the battered pickup trucks came to stack the LA Express kiosks with free tranny ads to remind us there was someplace yet to fall. Slam faces, slam doors, a cold KFC bucket, some coleslaw someone pulled from a dumpster. You think it's better? What does better mean? Might Hello Kitty sing? A mother cry? Would a father even miss the Disneyland daughter he hadn't seen since she was supposed to be his boy? We must remember transgenders who simply wanted to be themselves. She was cosmic headscarves, tap dance fingerprints, and origami eyes. She was satin camisoles, bedsheet corsets, flowers, cards, the hospice lobby for those too courageous to walk inside. There was nothing simple about her, or her, or her, or her. Bless those who disown their sons, yet say they listen to the same punk rock as they always have. Bless those whose children fled on a nighttime Greyhound bus, yet still bake cookies with raisins instead of chocolate chips. May God help those proper Presbyterians who kicked out their daughters, whose NPR membership leads to nights discussing the oppressed people of the day and how it's maddening but not realistic to demand justice for this generation or another after that. Light a candle, loop a ribbon. For in a world without runaways and cast-offs and queers, who shall redeem the rope and the razors and the cans of gasoline? After life comes death. After death comes the community memorial. After the community memorial comes the HIV questionnaire. Then some grad student discards the personal comments to perform t-tests on the numbers that remain. A null hypothesis, a grant proposal, a new coffee maker for the office. 4 miles south, bulletproof windows, 2-for-1 pizza, cash to go, $1 Chinese food. And the scholars go, I am sure, so sure that I can assure you for sure that surely you are not sure who you are. And the best way to ensure who you are, I am sure, is for you to be sure you are sure that until I can be sure that you are sure who you are, surely you can't be sure you are sure. So surely don't say you are sure, because surely I am sure that you can't be sure. Meanwhile, on the streets, it's time to get authentic and shout, we shall overcome. Invoke the right Frida. Quote the right Audra. Lord, to shake things up, to organize, to close one's eyes and righteously fantasize of a favorite genderqueerish hottie with a dancer's ass, chestnut thighs, dreads, and high cheekbones. Auto-tuned in search of food trucks, riding Dayglow fixies for anarchy and fair trade Americanos they consume to get hard, to get real, to get laid. Revolution? Blood sport. Because dead queers are easier to pray to. Because they don't talk back and kill your buzz.
Yes.
But I am not cruelty-free. I do not offer a gluten-free option. I won't talk like a pirate. I won't pump up the volume, get wasted, have sex with you at Burning Man. I won't dig your hair up, save the planet at this badass rally, talk Chinese, support your Greenpeace, stop eating sushi, forsake animal proteins, and ride your damn fixie. I start my Honda, drive to my favorite freezer section, my soft shoot past the okra and peas, waltz by the briars, caramel praline crunch. You miss Chick-fil-A? Shit, I'm my own guilty pleasure. The security guard, the cashier, even the cart with one stuck wheel cannot stop the revel of his nighttime promenade. 20 years ago, the astrologer would not suspend his disbelief. 10 years ago, the composer couldn't harmonize transgender with friend. 5 years ago, the weaver unraveled a rainbow at my name. Someday my car won't pass the smog test. I just found out I may go blind. Each day I take 5 pills to make me a little more like something I can never be. Yet I will still hear hummingbirds, sip my coffee, maybe sit on ice chest. Until her saviors go away, until her spirit guides stop reciting every reason to kneel before the next muscle car blowing down the street. Who can ponder which weight she has become, yet how completely she still would give her dance to love? To pull a sweater from my closet, shove my cell phone into my purse, then march for groceries with a 5-minute stop at CVS. The composer may abandon his backbeat. The astrologer may withhold his gaze. The weaver may sever the threads of youth, threads of self, even as she cuts me like another inconvenient thread. Unable to grasp what dust shall never settle upon the soul.
I just want to say, eat at other retreats. I'd now like to introduce the faculty member for the Young Adult Friday. Emily Danforth White, now the Miseducation of Cameron Post, which is now a feature film. Is a story partly about the conversion therapy, partly about conversion therapy set in rural Montana in the 1980s. The book won the Montana Book Award and was a finalist for the American Library Association's William C. Morris Award and Lambda Literary Award. Her creative nonfiction has appeared in various publications and has appeared on NPR's program All Things Considered. Emily is an associate professor of English creative writing at Rhode Island College in Providence. Her second YA novel, Side Talks with Girls, is forthcoming from HarperCollins publisher. Emily lives in Rhode Island with her wife and two semi-terrible dogs, Kelly and Sally.
Playwright and a poet. And fiction writer coming. This is not the novel that William just mentioned. First of all, thank you. Thanks to Lambda for having me. This is not the novel that William just mentioned, but all I'll say is I'm reading from the beginning. I don't need to do a lot of setting up. It's a novel that's half contemporary and half historic. It's called Plain Bad Heroines, and this section takes place at a Gilded Age boarding school. It's a terrible story, and one way to tell it is this. 2 girls in love and a swarm of yellow jackets curse the place forever after. Maybe you think you already know this story because of the movie they made about it. You don't, but we can argue about that later. Right now, I prefer to know your take on yellow jackets. Do you know how mean and especially territorial they get in the autumn, when they can sense the coming cold and snow, so all they want to do is get sweet things back to their queen? Do you know that some people call them meat bees, which is technically incorrect, they're wasps, but still kind of badass? Do you know that when they're distressed, they can call on potentially hundreds of their angry friends to help them come get you? In this case, the you was Clara Broward, and my God, was she ever newly in love with Florence Flo Hartshorn. And my God, did that ever upset Clara's wretched cousin Charles, who was just now chasing her through the thick woods surrounding the Brookhant School for Girls. The air in those woods was weighted with the scent of fern rot and ocean tide, apple mash, and wet earth. And more than that, it was humming with the trill of yellow jackets. A few were probably already swirling around Clara like dust motes sprung from the beating of a rug. Their buzzing pitch threaded to her pulse as her messy steps propelled her toward a clearing and the black Oxford orchard, where dozens of apples felled in a recent storm now spoiled in the heat. Waiting there in the orchard, sprawled beneath a tree with juice dripping down her chin, was Flo, the love of Clara's young life, a life about to end. 2 lives about to end, careful readers. We know that the year was 1902 and the state the tiniest in the nation, Rhode Island. We know that the Brookhant's fall term had been in session for 7 weeks. And we know that Clara took off to that section of the woods onto the orchard path because several of her classmates watched her do it. She'd just been delivered back to campus after a mandatory weekend stay at her parents' house in Newport, which they were readying to close for the season. Cousin Charles had been the one tasked with driving her back. More than a few students had noticed this fact because what he'd driven her in was still something of a loud and chugging novelty, even for the wealthy Brookhant's population, a gas-powered automobile. And not just any automobile, but a Winton, same as the Vanderbilts, which is exactly why Charles had gone out and bought the damn thing, along with the even stupider driving goggles that went with it. And of course he was wearing them when they pulled through the Brookhant's gates, and then as he slowed, he pushed them up, which smushed his hair back into a nest atop his horrible head. Maybe some of the girls had, in fact, later said that he looked rakish and fine, but for now, let's discount their certainly incorrect opinions. The important thing to know is that Charles and Clara were arguing as they pulled in, and they continued to argue, the onlooker said, as he parked his loud contraption in the circle drive before Main Hall, and had seemed to say their goodbyes very unhappily. Charles lunging from the car before dumping Clara's belongings in a pile next to him, all the while continuing to lecture her. Then he got back into the driver's seat and pouted there, his arms folded tight across his chest and his dumb face sour. But whatever command she had just been given, Clara did not gather her dumb things and go inside her dormitory, as might have been expected, as it seems Charles was expecting. Instead, she marched across the wide quad lawn, which ended on 2 sides in a playing field rimmed with dark woods, where began the path to the orchard, the path to Flo. and then she disappeared completely into the small black mouth that was the path's entrance. And this, my dear readers, is where the onlooking classmates begin to differ in their accounts. Some insisted later that Clara knew her knuckle-dragging cousin had left the car and was now running after her. Those students claimed she had started to run even before reaching the woods, seeing or sensing Charles coming fast behind. And others say she didn't know, hadn't seen, and Clara herself could never say again.
Thank you, Emily. So next up is the faculty member for fiction. Chinelo is the winner of 2 Lambda Literary Awards, and other honors include shortlisting for the 2017 International Dublin Literary Award, a 2017 Amelia Bloomer Project Selection of the American Library Association, a nomination for the 2016 Hurston Wright Legacy Award. Is there any awards you haven't? The 2014 New York Library Literary Lions Fiction Award, and she has been published in the New Yorker, Granta, Tin House, the Kenyon Review, and other venues, and was named one of Granta's 6 New Voices for 2012. Woo. In 2017, Chinelo was named one of Granta's Best Young American Novelists. Woo.
Hi everyone, how are you? I just have to say thank you so much for having me here. Also, I have the best group. I don't know what you are, but we're all so great and they love each other, so it's very nice to be in a classroom full of love. So also, when I walk around, I see so many people working, writing, and so you've inspired me to, I haven't written anything, but I'm trying. But you've inspired me to read something new. It's not very good, so I apologize. Actually, I told my students not to apologize. But anyway, it's a work in progress, but hopefully it's my hopefully forthcoming collection of short stories. And I'll read a brief excerpt. All you need to know is that there's a cavern, a cave involved, and it takes place in Nigeria. But it could take place anywhere else. The first thing that caught her eye after turning from the baby was that very painting of Jesus. Brown-colored Jesus with a black lamb around his shoulders, a halo on each of their heads, both gazing far left into the distance. His clothes were beige, but a purple ipele down his shoulders and across his body, like a proper Niger Jesus, minus the wavy Onyocha hair, of course. She stared at Jesus for a minute, which then led to 10 minutes of staring, which then led to 20. This beautiful brown-skinned Jesus that hung upon her wall, watching over her and her baby. She thought of what he represented to so many people, his love for humanity, his soothing, saving grace. Was it not he who made the blind man see? Was it not he who walked on water, who exorcised demons, who turned water to wine, who brought back the dead? She felt a numbness in her soul, so much numbness that she might as well be dead. A numbly racing mind. Could Jesus one day settle her numbly racing mind and bring her back to life? When the anxiety was so much that she could no longer bear it, Emmanuel knew what she must do to attain release. It was then that she called softly to Jesus, the way she always did when she was feeling this way. But instead of only calling, this time she laid on the bed, tied a sock around her mouth to make sure she did not make a sound that would awake the child. She lay so that she was facing Jesus, so that he could speak to her with his eyes. She brought her hands to herself, embraced herself by the arms downward, lifted the skirt of her dress. Was it blasphemy, a sacrilege? She might have given it more thought, but the desperation in her heart and her loins doused her concern with such trivialities as blasphemy. What she needed was a release, or else she might very well go crazy. What would become of the child with a missing father and a crazy mother? Drips of pleasure came as soon as she touched it, her fingers wet with relief. Slowly the pressure builds up into something full, something massive, and she saw it in his face. Jesus encouraging her to continue to climb. Jesus blessing her. Jesus calling on her to embrace her humanity, to revel in the small pleasures of her being. She was almost there. Soon she would be there, a matter of seconds, and would finally appear her long-sought deliverance. When the knock came, she swore it must have been Jesus coming to release her in the flesh. But the persistence of the knocking was like a wedge in the arch of her pleasure. Jesus could not have been so cruel as to have introduced the cold, recurring obstruction of a sound just when she felt herself a mere step from her climax. She exhaled with deflation. The baby was turning a bit in the crib. Another tumbling, rambling knock on the door, and the woman's voice calling out her name. Emmanuel, a pause. Emmanuel, it's me. Are you in there? No, stop. Sure.
All right, so our last reading of the evening is from the faculty member for the nonfiction workshop, Denizet-Lewis. Benoit is a longtime writer for the New York Times Magazine, where he is known for deeply reported cover stories and features about identity, LGBT life, youth culture, and mental health. Benoit's narrative nonfiction has also appeared in Rolling Stone, Slate, and Out. He is the author of 3 nonfiction books, including America, Anonymous, 8 Addicts in Search of a Life, and the New York Times best-selling Travels with Casey, My Journey with Our Dog Crazy Country. Named one of the most influential LGBT media members by The Advocate, Benoit appears on many radio and television programs, including Good Morning America, The Today Show, and NPR's Here and Now and On Point. He teaches at Emerson College in Boston, Massachusetts.
Hey everyone. I wanted to read from what I'm currently working on, but I can't do that because it's a very gay New York Times Magazine piece, but they would fire me if I read from it before it's published. So I can't do that, unfortunately. And there's a lot of gay parts in this book too. It's a book about me driving around the country with my dog, and really it's about dogs in contemporary American life. But I'm not going to read any of those either because I'm going to read from the beginning. I just can't believe that I went to see a therapist for my relationship with my dog, but I did. So I'm going to read a little bit from that moment. And I miss my dog. He passed away. And this book came out 4 years ago. I don't think my dog likes me very much, I told Dr. Joel Gabriel Gold, a Manhattan psychoanalyst shaped like an English bulldog. I had come to interview Dr. Gold about his book, When Pets Come Between Partners, How to Keep Love and Romance in the Human Animal Kingdom of Your Home. But he had deftly turned the tables and was now mining my subconscious for signs of canine-related dysfunction. Against my better judgment, I confessed to worrying that my 9-year-old lab golden retriever mix, Casey, would prefer to live elsewhere. By elsewhere, I didn't mean in a different house or in a different neighborhood. I meant with a different person. I feel like I'm disappointing Casey, like I'm not good enough for him. I explained to Dr. Gold, who specializes in the myriad ways we saddle our pets with our psychological baggage. He leaned forward in his black office chair and looked at me with what felt like grave concern. Go on, he said. His gentle gaze moving down to Casey, who lounged at my feet on the carpeted floor of this garden-level office decorated with old paintings of dogs, including one of Rin Tin Tin. A few feet away, Dr. Gold's enormous black herding dog, Dova, snored on his sofa by the window. Dr. Gold believes that dogs make for valuable therapeutic tools, and in the last 15 years, he has rarely come to work without one. But I wasn't sure I wanted to go on. I was embarrassed to be here, prattling on about how my dog hurts my feelings, about how he makes me question whether I'm a good person. Dogs, after all, have been carefully bred to make us feel like champions. Best of all, we don't have to do all that much. This is a critical difference between dogs and cats. Mistreat your cat and he will likely shit on your pillow and find a better place to live. Mistreat your dog and he will likely stick around, eager to let bygones be bygones. Dogs are relentless optimists, eager to lick your face at the slightest sign of your better self. Of course, I don't mistreat Casey. We swim in the ocean, chase tennis balls at the park, play hide and seek around the house, we wrestle, we bark at the moon. We even have our little special game where I ask him to little speak and he growls softly and adorably. Still, I've spent much of our 9 years together convinced that he's not especially fond of me. But I didn't think it was all in my head. Casey's really good at looking miserable, I told Dr. Gold. If he deems it too long since his last walk or feeding, he will sigh loudly. I've never heard a dog sigh the way Casey does. It's his most human trait. Many dogs seem to play the poor me card when they want to guilt us into something, but with Casey, the look seems cruelly genuine. Even when Casey looks happy, he's not one for outward displays of loyalty. He's not like the dog I grew up with, Milou, a husky German Shepherd mix, named after the dog in the popular Belgian comic, Les Aventures de Tintin. Milou likes sleeping with her head in my lap, and always seemed to be checking up on the humans around her. Are you okay? Anything I can do? Seemed to be her default mode. Casey, on the other hand, seems to like my friends more than me. I relayed a heartbreaking story to Dr. Gold. When Casey was 2, I had to leave my Boston apartment for a week-long business trip. My friend Mike wasn't working at the time and agreed to take temporary custody of my dog. He promised to, quote, spoil him rotten, and he didn't disappoint. I received regular hyperbolic updates recounting marathon-length walks on the beach, extravagant hamburger doggy dinners, a pet store chew toy spending spree, and an afternoon devoted entirely to letting Casey hump dogs at the dog park. Upon my return, I went to Mike's apartment to retrieve my best friend. Casey seemed happy enough to see me at first, but as I tried to coax him into the car, he ran back to the front door of Mike's apartment building, planted his butt on the stoop, and stared expectantly at the doorknob. It's difficult to overstate how crushed I was by this betrayal, I stammered in Dr. Gold's office. You saw it as a betrayal, he asked. I did. It sounds to me like he was just being a lab, Dr. Gold said, looking at Casey with a warm, rosy-cheeked smile. How do you figure, I asked him. He probably just wanted more hamburgers. I don't think this was about hamburgers, I countered, more dramatically than I intended. What do you think it was about? That was easy. Casey wanted to live with Mike, and was I being selfish by not letting him go? Was I putting my neediness ahead of my dog's happiness? Those questions had ricocheted around in my head as I called for Casey to come to me from Mike's doorstep. But the animal I'd loved and cared for since he was 11 weeks old looked right through me and didn't move. Woodrow Wilson once said, if a dog will not come to you after having looked you in the face, you should go home and examine your conscience. Devastated, I marched over to Mike's doorstep, grabbed Casey by the collar, and pulled him toward the car. He looked sad. I must have looked sadder. In Caroline Knapp's book, Pack of Two, she writes that, quote, in all likelihood, dogs do not make comparative assessments about their lives, do not lie around wishing they were elsewhere, fantasizing about better owners, dreaming of more varied settings. I'm not so sure. I imagine if Casey were blessed with the power of human speech, he might break my heart. You've been interesting, I could see him saying, but I'd like to give another human a try. So that's it gets better. Actually, and part of the reason that I did, there were 2 reasons. So part of the reason is that I wanted to feel better. And by the end of it, I didn't force it. I could have faked the ending, but it actually did. Through this 4-month journey, I learned to accept my dog and love my dog. And so it's partially about us, but it's also about dogs in contemporary life, and I still can't believe I went to a therapist for that.
Well, Benoit, I'm glad it worked out between you and your dog. And now I want to thank all the faculty members. I want to invite all the faculty members to come up and join me on, it's not quite a stage, but in this 4 chairs here, I'm going to ask just a couple of questions, and then I'm going to pass it on to you, the audience. And here is a mic.
Very tribunal, I have to say.
I'm going to get personal for the first question. Is that okay? So recently I was reading this quote from the songwriter Leonard Cohen. He was talking about how artists have like one secret or one theme that they're always trying to work over in their work. And I wanted to know if you agreed with that, and if you had a theme that you were constantly trying to work over and get into and dig into as you continue writing and working.
I mean, the easy answer for me is like, I actually answered this, it's like, I just hope at the end of my life, everybody just reads my work and decides it's one giant love letter from their time here. You know? But the hard answer for me is I keep dealing with issues of validity. Not simply as a trans woman, which is not really the easiest thing sometimes, but also as an Asian. I grew up speaking Hawaiian Pidgin. My folks are very, I wasn't really exposed to that. And so I keep thinking, I don't really belong here in the English language. And sometimes I feel that when it's time to be natural or courageous or vivid, something holds me back that I'm not good enough to do that. And I feel when I look at my work, I still see that sort of sheen of self-restraint, or that scene of shame that I still feel. So, every day we try to clear a little bit of that up, but it's still here. And so I look at my work and I'm always just a little bit, I wish I could be freer.
I guess that's a complicated question. There's a lot of things I think I'm trying to work out. But just on the topic of shame, I think I'm really interested in shame. I mostly write about other people's shame, shame that they're either conscious of or not. I read a lot about groups that a lot of people hate. So when other people think other people should feel shame for the way that they live or things that they believe. So I've written a lot about outsiders who are disliked, sometimes by both the right and the left, sometimes by either one. And then working through shame in my own work too. When I've written about myself, I think I'm working through a lot of that, especially in my addiction book. Shame is a huge part of the lives of the people that I'm writing about, and then my own experience too. And then secondarily, probably feeling, I think another reason I like to write about people about outsiders is that I've always felt, maybe it's also because a lot of journalists, I'm sort of a journalist / nonfiction writer, and I always feel like I'm not ever really in a group. I'm always sort of observing it, which sucks. But as a journalist, that can be a good thing. So maybe those are the two things. And then probably identity and gender and masculinity are also things that I'm working through and thinking about. That's what I wanted to do.
I just wanted to say that the YA cohort is the best cohort. So you can have it back now.
Well, I have this book, it's called Happiness Like Water. And I have this other book, Under the Udala Trees, but the excerpt, incidentally, that I usually like to read ends with happiness, this idea of what is happiness. Is happiness a word like mad, shame, angelic, joy? What is happiness? And so I think I was preoccupied with, in writing those two books, though they came out separately, I was preoccupied with what it means to be happy and how much say we have in our own happiness versus how others can sort of dictate what happiness should be for us, how much power we're willing to give to others to dictate our own happiness, that sort of thing. Incidentally, when I went, I was invited because of Happiness Like Water to Uzbekistan, and they would think that I'm obsessed with water because, they were going through like a water shortage. And they were like, come talk to us about happiness like water. And I was like, it has nothing to do with water.
I don't know that it doesn't answer the question certainly the way that the other folks have, but I think that one thing that's always driven me is this investment that I have in story. I think that stories ultimately really matter, and I don't know how to make sense of myself without stories. But at the same time, right, at the exact same time, I've always found language to be really messy and imperfect and never able to capture any of the stuff that I want to say. So I think there's something about that contradiction that I'm always trying to get at when I write, which is that the story is the thing that I always go to try to make sense of the world, but language is such an imperfect vehicle to do it.
I think a lot about class. I thought that I was writing about race for so long, but really I write about class. And I think it has to do with, I was born and raised in downtown LA. It was Pico Union in a very, very poor neighborhood. And I was telling somebody the story the other day that the food critic who just passed, Jonathan Gold, was this lovely man. And many years ago I got the pleasure to interview him, and we went to all these restaurants. It was like an eating tour, right? Yeah. And every restaurant I would say oh my God, this taco is so expensive, Jonathan. And so about the fourth restaurant, he was like, oh my God, it's like you're no fun to eat with. You're just worried about how much everything costs, right? And I think in a way, in the playwriting, I am trying to give voice to a population they never really see on stage without making fun of them. So we see poor people on stage, but we're always making fun of them or we're judging them in very harsh ways, right? So how do you see working class people on stage and not have them be buffoons and educated buffoons, right? And so I think in a way, even like gang culture stuff I write or prison stuff I write, it's about really intelligent people who are, intuitive and trying to figure out where they are straddling the line of culture and community and economics and all that. So, that came late to me, but it feels like it's definitely, every single play is about struggling class issues. Yeah.
Well, this is a queer retreat, if you did not know. So, I ask this question every time we have a new group of faculty, and it's about queer aesthetics. And I wanted to know, do you think there is such a thing as queer aesthetics? And if you do, if you could maybe tell me what you think that may look like, or what does it look like to you, queer aesthetics?
Thank you for telling me the answer. I would say that I think it's about the gaze and where I look when I'm writing and how I look at the world, right? So I guess my aesthetic is tied into, this is like, I feel like I'm at an 80s multicultural conference right now. Because that same question always popped up, right? But I don't know how I can separate being Chicano and being queer, right? And so in some way, they're so tied together. And Chicanos look at the world in a very specific, I have one foot on that side of the border and one foot on this side of the border. And queer culture is the same thing. I live in a world where I'm not the dominant culture, right? And yet the way I transmute or transmit the world is completely through my queer gaze. And so, I think it's like a straddling of two worlds, always. and that I'm writing from not the margins anymore, but because I feel like I just did an experiment, a very interesting experiment. So I got rid of my television on the day that the president was elected. And then I got rid of all my streaming services. And then I got rid of all my videos and everything. And because I didn't read enough. And so I started to read, right? And I had a lot of writing to do. So I got rid of it all. And then what happened is I thought to myself, the only person I really missed was Nene Leakes, you know who she is? That was the only person I actually missed. So I was like, I gotta really focus my energy here. But then the other thing was, I decided that at this late game in my life, I was not going to look at the world from the side, so I just stopped taking in information that was told to me by the dominant culture. So I just started to stop looking at, anchors that were white, and anybody who was TV shows that, the way we moved to a TV show is that the default is a white character, and I just moved away from that. And so in my world, I'm always with Latinos, or I'm always with working class people, I'm always in a very different environment. And that has really changed the way I'm looking at the world. That's a queer gaze, right? Because all of a sudden, my shift is so radical and different. So just this week, I finally went back to a movie and I saw the Fred Rogers, the Mr. Rogers movie. And I didn't know Mr. Rogers because I'm Mexican. So, we never saw that man. And so, I wanted to be my friend, seriously. But I think it's my gaze is slowly coming back. Does that make sense? But my powerful writing is staying. And that's really interesting to see the shift in the writing. I just want to throw that out as an idea.
Hi. I was noticing this in our poetry workshop, and I've seen this with a lot of queer writers I've worked with, and I think I share some of this too. We're tired, and we're hurt, and there are times where, just like maybe the first time you had queer porn and your folks are aware. There's a whole difference between, looking at queer porn and reading straight porn. Yeah. And you're kind of like this, and you're scared, and you're so hyper aware of the moment. And I think it's that hyper awareness that's produced its own aesthetic. I think that we don't have the chance to listen to the entire symphony. So ours is an aesthetic of valuing the notes as they happen. And the immediacy, and I think about people who survived the plague. We have to think about here and now. And I think that no other literature than invests so much in honoring and really embracing and experiencing and elevating the present as our literature and the detail of what it means to be us. So that's what I see, and I think that's something that I feel that we can really bring to the bigger picture.
So I'm really surprised that no one's talked about their own cohort, but nonfiction is truly truly. I don't have a great answer to that question. I'll talk to you briefly about, and I actually talked about it a little bit in our session today. For me, as a gay journalist, where my gayness is most, it comes through in often the things that I'm writing about, but because I'm writing about LGBT culture so often, the biggest way that I'm aware of, I think I could bring more sort of subtlety. I sort of know the complexity of the issues in a way that a straight reporter probably wouldn't. But I also, the thing that I struggle with is my role as personally in my life, wanting to improve the lives of LGBT people and put our best face forward always. And then the thing that I really believe in as a journalist is to write honestly and messily, it's not a word, but is that a word? Yeah, and people are messy and complicated, and so sometimes messy and complicated is not perhaps what our best face forward. So that tension is something I'm always aware of in what I'm writing about, and trying to figure out what my responsibility is. And sometimes people think it's really hard to do that and to figure out where. But the gayest I've ever felt as a writer is at the gym in Provincetown with Michael Cunningham and Andrew Sullivan, all doing bicep. Things at the gym in town. That's where I feel like the gayest writer. So anyway, and I talked to a couple people in my cohort today who not only never been to Provincetown, but had never heard of Provincetown, and that's a crime. So, go.
Well, I guess to answer your question, the idea of what is a queer aesthetic to me is, for me, an awareness that there is no one queer aesthetic, that there is a multiplicity of what that means, and that, to me, queer aesthetic means inclusivity. But it also means having the confidence to claim the center as any other group might, so that we give ourselves the power, the confidence to come out of the margins and claim the center. But with everybody included, all of us, all the different flavors that we are. So that's sort of what it means to me.
I'm just going to echo all of these answers. And I keep, as people have been talking, I keep thinking of this line from Dorothy Allison's Skin, where she talks about having a perfect right to claim. I think she specifically says lesbian text, right? But she can claim a text as queer. She has a perfect right to do that as a queer. And I love that, and I think that's my definition, right? Maybe it's a little bit akin to the old definition for pornography. I know it when I see it, right? But I feel like I like that idea of a perfect right. I have a perfect right to claim that. So that works for me.
I cannot stand my cohort. They're lazy, they're mean, and I don't like them.
So I have one more question before I pass the baton on to the audience. You talked a little bit about turning off the TV when you saw that Trump got elected. I want to ask, how did this kind of fraught political moment affect your writing, or does it affect your writing, or how does it kind of transform what you're working on or thinking about working on?
It's turned me really deeply to genre. And I don't know exactly, I know it has something to do with that election, but it basically, moments after, I said this yesterday, I've been reading horror novels and just really steeped in horror novels and thinking a lot about monsters and different kinds of monsters and curses. And there's something about those fantastic elements that feel like the right way for me to express a lot of the anxiety that I have right now. So it's turned me really deeply into a kind of genre writing that I've never done before.
Hi. Well, there's two things that are two very different urges that I have with this. The first one is I've just felt a need to connect with anything outside of this country. And, so last year, I went to Japan, and sort of connecting to a place where it's almost like leaving a safety net, where it's like, where can I go in case all heck breaks loose? On the other side, though, I feel that, the other part of my world where I teach martial arts, that's starting to weave more into my work, and not in my own personal work just there, but also weaving with the community, trying to use whatever words I have and whatever skills I have to go. You shouldn't say that now because that's letting your opponent know how you're going to attack. Why don't we hold that until later on and we can strategically deploy it? A lot of times I think I feel personally, and maybe you do too, our gift as a writers, we plot things out, we can look at stuff, and I think that's, sometimes you see somebody with the right message and they just said it wrong, and you just realize they just ruined it. And so part of what I'm trying to do, with the community, with groups, is to try to talk about strategy, to try to talk about plot, to try to show people that we don't need to jump into the mud and adopt this person's lexicon. We can keep the language elevated. When people say, when people just call him the Cheeto and things like that, that's nice in the moment, but what does that do but get rid of your inspiration to do better work later? And so, there's a difference between catharsis and actually changing things. And how many people say, they want to be writers, but writing is work? How many people want to be activists? Well, activism is work in a very analogous way. So I think as we are sitting here, and I'm going to actually challenge all of you, leverage your ability to delay gratification, to see the work through at the end, and see the big picture, and let's end this fucker.
I'm sort of embarrassed by how much the election impacted my ability to produce. It did. Part of the problem, I think, was that and it's not an original idea, but the idea that and I do write some about politics, but not a ton. And I'm trying to figure out what my next book's going to be about, and every idea just feels not as important as the moment that we're going through, and so So I really struggled with that, and struggled with the there was that New York Times piece about the guy who shut off. I don't know, anyone read his profile? Some people hated it, about a guy who shut off all communication with the world, right? So he wasn't getting any news, and part of me wants to do that, but I can't, and that's not the right thing for me to do, but. Part of me feels to get work done, I need to do that, but I'm not going to do that. But so I've really struggled with being as productive a writer during this time, because of following the news. The other thing is I'm writing a story now that's tangentially, not totally. There's some Trump people in it, and I'm writing some Trump supporters in it, and I'm writing about them. And that's a very difficult thing to do during this time, because the piece will be criticized for even acknowledging or giving voice to them. So that's also a really tricky thing. But I've always, again, as I said at the beginning, writing about people that everyone hates. So, so yeah, I've struggled on all kinds of levels with this, both in terms of my own writing and then what I should be writing about and how I should be writing about it.
I would actually disagree that not everyone hates the Trump supporters.
Oh yeah, I didn't.
Because when Trump won the election, I was living in rural, you were laughing at me.
I wasn't laughing at you. I was
Like, why did anybody move to Pennsylvania? Well, I did. For a job in health insurance. So I was living there when he won the election, and I think this whole situation of Trump winning made me hyper aware of what I was in as a Black woman and immigrant, and many other, categories that I sort of I check the box for people who care about box checking. It's never been an easy existence in America, right? But after he won, it was as if I was being bombarded with all the reasons why I am not the right person to be in America. So living where I lived, I had students suddenly writing stories about sending all the black people, like, ostracizing them to a colony. I had a student do that. And then because they're still complaining about racial injustice, let's just annihilate them. And so I started writing essays because I had to sort of, analyze and think about what that meant, that we were in a world, in a country, in a town where this male white student felt that he could write this story and hand it to me, a black professor, in the class that was predominantly white, one other black person, one black student. Many of the female students were horrified, but it was interesting that many of the male students, white, of course, and I say that because it seems that there's a, if you look at it, statistically it seems that there is a very obvious system that happens. But anyway, they just thought, oh, I like the part of the story where the action happens, and I like how he threw the glass on the wall and how it shattered. And many of the female students thought, I think something's wrong with a story where you think the solution for people complaining about racial injustice is to annihilate them. So, this whole idea of thinking deeper about text, context, subtext, it seems to be a good time for us as teachers to really try to reach students and not stop at the craft, because sometimes we stop at that very superficial level, which is the craft. Beyond that, living in a town like that, I've had to tolerate seeing white power signs everywhere. I've had to, be on a bus ride with other faculty members where older white male faculty member is saying how Africans are not educated and stupid and there are no good schools and they don't do math. And the other supposedly liberal-minded faculty members, whites, will just remain quiet as the only two black people on the bus try to defend themselves. And later on, the white faculty members will say to me, oh, you should just let it wash. Don't let it bother you, just let it wash through. It's fine. Like, why are you letting it bother you? He was just stupid. And I think to myself, So now it becomes me. I am not taking your abuse correctly. It is now my responsibility to take his racism well. And in that moment where you, fellow white person, could have said something to your fellow white person, you didn't. You were silent. And then when it's now safe for you to say something to the person you think should have tolerated the abuse well, you now feel like you should say something. So it's just been a very interesting thing, and of course these things are going to influence my writing. Whether it's good writing or not, I don't know. I'm going to try to make it good. But there's a lot going on in the country, and if you are from the margins, but margins that will become the center, then you have a lot to say and you should say it.
Yes.
Woo! I just want to say I think this is a great time to write, and writing like mad. I'm really inspired by what you said earlier, because I feel like I lived through the plague. I'm old. I lived through AIDS, and I lived through censorship, and I've lived through a lot of cyclical moments in American history. And as a Mexican American, I've lived through a lot of this. And this is a time to generate work. And I'm older now, so I think the access has gotten better. And working in American Regional Theater is the most freeing and the most restricting thing in the world, right? And so in some ways, I think it also, I had a great teacher, Maria Fornes, who said to me very early in my career, there were many great artists before you, there will be many great after. All you have to do is tell the story of today. And so when these moments happen, I get very focused about telling the story of today. And I don't have to be literal, but I do have to be political. And I do think I have to write with aggression and fang
and power and center and all energy and movement and all those things in the theater we need, action, and to feel it, right? To really write through stuff and to really give it the weight that it needs. So in some ways, I don't know, I mean, I look at this moment and I also, I feel, I'm in a university and an academy where we struggle with, how students respond, and in some way, it's not just about the craft and technique, but it's also about content, and it's my job to take you on. I have 3 graduate students, and we're going to work for 3 years together, and we're going to talk about the moment we're in. And if you don't want to do that, I don't think we should be together. Right? And I love how the university in some ways supported that. I had a student who came and he said, I'm a conservative Christian, and I think that Muslims are destroying the country. And I said, well, you and I can't work together. I'm so sorry. And I don't want to even invite you into and I don't need to have the conversation. And maybe I should, and maybe there's walls to break down. Time is short.
Well, I think we're going to move to the audience for folks who might have questions. You just raise your hand and I'll pass you the baton.
I'll first. Hey y'all. Thank you all so much for those offerings and those medicines. I think I speak for all of us when I say really appreciate it. I'm trying really hard not to be an activist, but this is a political ass space that we're in. A whole bunch of queers gathered together with our president being who he is. And so I've heard a lot today, about, and it's so necessary when we talk about, honoring our elders who lived through, the AIDS epidemic, and honoring folks who lived through, racialized oppression. But in America, where the life expectancy for a trans person of color is 30, and where an unarmed Black person is killed every 28 hours, I wonder how we're wrestling with these current realities in our work. And my question is, taking activist hat off, putting poet hat back on, how you, as writers and as teachers and most of you scholars, how you wrestle with privilege in your work and how you invite the folks that you mentor or teach to, what that looks like as a future teacher, hopefully, and as someone who leads these spaces. I often wonder how I can better engage things that may not be canonical, but I don't know if that's a word, but sure. I don't have my MFA yet. But things that may not be canonical but feel very urgent. So thank you.
You know what, I'll leave with the baton. Microphone.
Well, just very quickly, I feel like I fall into the hands of community, so I never work alone, ever, right? So I'm enveloped in community. I spent 10 years in this country, living in a different city in America for a year, and I chose very specific cities that were having very big problems. And I think in some ways what it taught me was that I have to build that from the ground up. But when I say that I've been around since the 70s, I think in some ways I also learned how to activate, right? And it's not about me activating, it's about activating a community with me. So it's about, taking people with me. So in some ways, when I'm in the university, as a good example, I just don't meet on campus. Now, it's problematic, but having classes in the city gets my students out of that walled fortress and into the community, right? So those little tricks really make a big difference, right? And to write about what's urgent and to encourage students to write, but I'm really facilitating someone's own process towards their excellence, right? And in some ways, it's who the candidate is. And so I think in the academy, the biggest challenge is how do I get into those rooms, and somebody help me, where I get to be on selection committees. I now spend almost all my university service time trying to get tenure for people of color and women. That's all I'm doing. That's all I'm doing at USC. And it's exhausting, awful chair work, right? But I've got some pretty good people right? So it's not about me, it's about how can I grow this community there that's eventually gonna be a force that changes curriculum, that changes the structure of the school, that changes the way we even get money, right? All of that stuff. So in some ways, I think that's something I learned a long time ago, working for, an AIDS hospice in Southside. And that hasn't changed, right? Yeah.
I've been on a year of leave, but I'm actually at Rhode Island College, which is primarily a first generation a school for a lot of local kids, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, to some extent Connecticut. Very happily, a lot of students will say this was my safety school, right? I wasn't sure if I was going to go to college. There are a lot of students that aren't entirely sure why they're in the room. Also, without question, the best writers I've ever taught. I mean, hands down, the best writers I've ever taught. So, I think one thing that I try to do is, I teach the YA Lit class, is to bring in voices that are not like mine, right? And to bring those not only in the text that I'm teaching, but also with a Skype session, or to bring an author in. And that's one way I can actively use connections I have as a YA writer to bring those into my classroom. And I think that there are students that have transferred over and said, I'm going to write, I'm going to join the fiction workshop because I had this experience in the classroom where I saw this author, I got to read this text that mimicked my experience that I didn't even know that there was a book like that. And then the other, I think in the service capacity, it's putting in the extra hours after work, doing the spoken word group, right? Or trying to find them a space to meet on campus, or trying to find a space downtown to meet. I've been on a year of leave, but I still have 3 or 4 students that I work with just because they're talented and I want them to finish their books. So we email and try to keep that up, and I want their books to be in the world. But I think a lot of what I try to do is to bring other voices into the classroom that aren't mine, that I know that the students need to see.
Yeah, I love that, bringing other voices into the classroom, which is something that I try to do as well. But, I'm from Nigeria, and in Nigeria, there are many, many Nigerians on the ground who would be amazing writers, but they don't have that luxury, that privilege. They're too busy earning a living. That's not unlike anywhere else in the world. Like many Americans, probably the best writers you just never read because they didn't have a chance. They're busy working, having jobs, trying to, stay alive. And so it is a luxury, it's a privilege to even be able to write. The fact that we can be in schools and, taking, doing MFAs and that sort of thing. So in my classroom, which is one way that I can, make students aware of their privileges, is I have a course that I teach that is a writing culture in fiction, which is to say that we read books, and we read books from different backgrounds, and we talk about what responsibility, because if you have this privilege, if you have this opportunity to be a writer, then that opportunity, this privilege comes with responsibilities. And so we talk about those responsibilities, because there are many people out there who are not writing their own stories, and if you're going to write somebody else's story, you have to be aware of what you're doing. You can't do what I think William Styron, for instance, did with Confessions of Nat Turner, and denigrate an entire race of people, or, you name them, there are a billion of them who've written such books, where, even Joseph Conrad, arguably, Heart of Darkness, people can say, okay, he's doing more than what the book seems to be saying, fine, but there is a great responsibility, and so we read these books and we talk about the privileges that you as a writer have, and how much awareness you should have, especially if you're writing about a culture that is not your own. Is it something that you somehow feel like you own, that you know it enough to be able to write it, or is it something that you should keep true to the distance that you have from that culture? So, that's one way in which I'm trying to make students who are going to become writers and probably going to get published because they have that privilege, I want them to be at least aware of what they're doing.
Yeah, in my classes we spend a lot of time talking about, especially for young journalists and nonfiction writers, about what people are allowed, what they think they're allowed to write about, and what their worries are about what they're allowed to write about, and those are actually some very meaningful and honest conversations. I wanted to also answer your first question about transgender issues, and I just think of two stories that I actually wrote in LA. Actually, the first story I ever wrote for the New York Times Magazine when I was very, very young, and it's not a perfect story at all. It's a very dated story, but it was a story about a transgender boy, middle schooler, at a middle school out here in California, who was living very secretly with the help of teachers, and it was such a different time. So it's not a perfect story, but I'm proud of it. And then I wrote a story a few years ago, going door to door with a group out here from the Los Angeles LGBT Center, trying to replicate a little bit what they did with changing people's minds about gay marriage, and now they're focusing on changing people's minds about transgender people, and that was really fascinating. And they had a lot of success with. You would think like you go to someone's door and you're like, hey, I'd like to talk about transgender issues, and people have all kinds of excuses about why they don't want to, and they're busy. But watching both transgender and non talk to people at the door and create an emotional connection, and talk about discrimination that folks at the door had felt in their own life, and trying to help them help people connect at the door to either their feeling about, because everyone has a gay friend now, to connect their feelings to their gay friend, or to their own experience of discrimination or feeling unfairly judged. That was a fascinating experience. And then all these other sort of other progressive groups are trying to learn from them as they go door to door and have these conversations with voters, and is what kind of conversation can you have that will actually change someone's mind. And it's not about giving people facts, it's about creating an emotional bond at the door. And of course that's very difficult, but we can learn a lot. Sort of a lot of political groups are trying to figure out how we can how we use some of what they learned here to change people's minds. And what they're having to do is offset the awful ads that the other side will do about transgender people in bathrooms, and they actually show them those ads, and then they talk them through why those ads are bullshit, and then so it was an interesting experience to watch that.
All this talk of transgenders and bathroom, transgender people in restrooms makes me want to pee. I really do, but I'll do my best. Two things. First off, how many of you are familiar with the saying, crabs in a barrel? You know, like when you reach, the other crabs kind of drag you down. I think there's another thing going down to that, though. I think as a lot of the writers, I know we have a lot of writers, shouldn't say we because I don't know about me, but a lot of writers I see have very generous souls. And there's this feeling that I have to share my power immediately. So then you reach down with that one claw and you try to help the others, and everybody tumbles back down again. I would suggest to tell you that, privilege is not a bad thing. Misusing privilege is a bad thing. And, I have the privilege of leading this poetry workshop. And guess who I selected? I selected people that, through the eyes of a trans woman of color, in other words, I got to be the editor. Yeah. And I got to bring people. I wasn't looking for the cohort that I was looking for by identity, but by aesthetic. What I think is good, what I'm looking for in writing. I was faithful to that. And I think that, so I actually had to do, am I going to choose the correct people or I'm going to choose the people that I really like. In other words, am I going to use my power and my privilege, or am I going to cede it to this idea that I am somehow not worthy? So, when you go, all of you, just looking, you're going to go back home and you're going to wonder, what the hell did I do to deserve that? And, what you did was you were very, very good. And, so you exact social change by becoming badass. And then you can protect the other people coming up. And you can do a lot of shit with letters behind your name. Or with a book published, or with other kinds of things. So don't be afraid. Trust me, power will not corrupt you in the same way because you have roots that came up with you. Not saying that you're immune to it, but the very fact that you're asking that question. A lot of cisgender heterosexual white men, they just think they're entitled to that shit. You're sitting here asking, what do you do with it? And that's beautiful. So, just get published. Don't worry if you're ready or not. Just frickin' get published. Now, the second thing is I tithe. I tithe of my time. I tithe of my energy. I teach trans and queer youth of color runaways martial arts every week. I run a class. I've done this for like almost 10 years. And so at that point, they're free. I take them out. Anyway, I do pure community service because I have the time and the place to do it. So when I do have the privilege of time, I tithe back into the community. And in some ways, it might not even have to do with my writing. It's other ways. But I think that, more than a writer, I'm a human being, and I owe that to the community. So when I write, I occupy the space of writer, and I use the privilege as I may. But for me personally, that's not enough. I know too many dead people. I know too many sisters that are gone. I know too many. I'm just fucking sick of going to fucking candlelight vigils. And so as writers, we like to identify ourselves as writers, but sometimes I put the writer cap down, and I'm just Ryka. I'm just doing my best.
Hey y'all. Okay, cool. So I had a question specifically pertaining community. When we talk about community, at least when I think of community outside of an academic setting. And when I think of my work, I always grapple with this feeling of, am I becoming an academic writer? And when I say that, am I letting my talents only exist in the academic space? Am I only uplifting those kind of people? And I want to know from you guys what your work's relationship is with community. Does your work have a relationship with community out of academia? And also, how do you suggest us all as emerging writers integrate our work with the community?
It's not academia in terms of a collegiate setting, but I think partly just because I've written YA, I do, and Rick has a program, partly through our elementary ed school. We do quite a bit of work with writers in the schools, and so I think that's probably where I engage most with non-academic writers. And that program is not something that I started, but I feel really lucky that I brought YA readers in from the area to work with those students. We have sort of mentorships between some of our college writers, and we go into the classrooms and talk about our books, and similar to the Lambda program, but in Rhode Island, and bring free books. So I think that's like a significant level of engagement with young writers who are particularly interested in YA and middle grade, and sort of have these ideas of rock star, superstar writers that they want to talk about. And then there's a bunch of, I think, just Providence area writing groups and writing clubs that I'm involved in. But I would say that the thing that I'm most proud of is Writers in the School, and that takes up a lot of time. There's a big conference in the fall, and it feels really worthwhile. It feels like a worthwhile use of our time. not that hard a program to get off the ground. I mean, you can imagine any elementary school, any middle school loves a program like this. They're really pretty easy to facilitate if you already have some sort of a writing program at a college. It's actually not that hard a thing to implement.
Well, I guess I'll say that I haven't done any sort of count to see, how many people read my book from academic settings. But I would wager that my books are actually not being bought and read mostly by academia. I would say that it's just people outside of academia who need the book for whatever reason. I get letters from Nigerians. I'm Nigerian. I get letters from those living in the US, those living in Nigeria, telling me, one person was writing me from Brown. She's a student at Brown, but she has a family. I don't know where they are, but she told me she read my book in the closet, hiding in the physical closet in her family's home, worried that she would be caught reading it. But I think the book is reaching, at least the novel anyway, is reaching those people that it needs to reach. I think that any work that is needed by any community will find its way to the right people. And, I don't think there's really much academic about my novel, but I don't know, how do you judge that? It's a human story. It's a story that people, it's, in a way, people use this in a derogatory way, but it's an accessible book, and it's accessible for a reason. So, in terms of community, I would say that it's reaching people, it's reaching them. In my mind, it's reaching the right people, it seems, based on the letters that I get. Whatever the right means, but people who use it, who could use it the most.
Yeah, I would also say, even though I'm in academia, that my writing is not really mostly read there, intended for academia. I'll say that the most connected I've ever felt directly to a community of people that I was writing for, seemingly, was my first job out of college when I worked at XY magazine. I don't know if anyone's old enough to remember XY, but it was a very interesting print magazine, but it was aimed at gay youth, and not a perfect magazine. I was not in charge of it, but I was a features editor there, and the letters we would get from gay kids all across the country, who would, back when where there were more Barnes and Nobles, and people would, we'd get letters like, "Oh, I shoplifted the magazine out of Barnes and Noble." Good job. But or more common was that they would read the magazine in another magazine, and the one thing the magazine did a really good job of was interacting with and publishing the work, the poetry, the fiction, the nonfiction, the stories of queer kids all over the country. And so I never felt more, and that's why we had a lot of arguments at the magazine about what the magazine should be, because I never felt more responsible for people, and that we were that what we were producing, this is sort of, the internet had started, but it was not a thing. You could still be a kid who could think they were the only, in America, the only gay person around, and so there was, so that was the most I've ever felt connected to an actual community or having an impact. But the wonderful thing about writing for the New York Times Magazine is you get to sit on planes next to random people and talk about the story you wrote, and oh, I read that story about kids coming out of middle school, and we passed it around at school, and all of that. So the feeling that I can have an impact on educating people, and I can have a broad impact at the New York Times Magazine is good.
It's really kind of funny. I remember touring the country, sleeping on cat vomit sofas, with back in the days of the Training Roadshow, years ago, and but back when people said tranny and was, the language evolves, and thinking, what on earth am I doing? Going around this way, I remember just speaking in front of nobody, but people remember that stuff. And people to this day come out, I saw you at that place, I saw you here, and it meant something to me. Sometimes I think we have to trust our readers to remember. We can't remember for them. And when you're out and you're doing good work, sometimes you have to release the responsibility of being memorable and being effective, and let the reader and the listener open their heart actively and seek you out. The other thing that I say too is, we are very important to the queer community. I really believe that, but we are only part of the queer community. We are, so the kidney doesn't really worry about pumping blood. That is the job of the heart. The heart does not worry about digesting food. That is the part of the stomach and the intestines. What I'm saying is, our part in this play is that of writers. And there are some things that we have limits. One of my students one of my martial arts students is in jail because he was attacked by somebody and he stabbed him. And he was self-defense, but being a trans youth of color, what do you think happened? He's never going to get the chance to sit here. So the question is, do I stop writing? So, all I can say is, I'm going to light a candle. I'm going to pray. I'm going to, every night kind of offer, and I'm going to try to do the best job and hope that my job and the work I do somehow, sanctifies his existence.
Just very quickly say that working in the theater is very different in some ways, because I tell my terrible cohort today, my layabouts, that I told them today that, I don't just bring the play to the American theater, you bring the audience, because they're not there. So if you want your people to see your play, you got to bring your people with you. And that is community organizing. And so I was telling a little story today about the taco truck. And it seems so silly to bring the taco truck because that's going to bring the people, that's going to bring the play. But in some ways, I think it's the way we community organize, right? At its most basic level is doing that, is going straight to the community, whatever that is. And the community shifts and changes every time. So one thing I'm really clear, and I just think it's important to say, is that the Academy can also be a trap. And it was 7 years of, for me, of pain to get that fucking tenure. And then when I got the tenure, the nice thing was, I'm sorry, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm going to get tenure for other people, but now what I'm going to do is I'm doing a really cool playwriting workshop in East LA, and I'm doing this. Yeah, so I'm not doing it on campus anymore. I'm going to do this. And what I'm going to do is bring a lot of prestige to the school. And every time I get an award, I will mention you. Thank you. But this is the way we can build it and get people there. So community changes, right? The definition of what community is too. And sometimes community is very simply the audience. Who do you want to be at that play, right? And I think it shifts and changes. And then with writing, I think it shifts and changes too, right? Who do you want to read your work? And you gotta go get them. And that's the exhausting part of doing citizen artistry, right? Because then I think it's not just the privacy of writing, it's the publicness of accessing community too. I hate my cohort.
And on that note, we actually have to wrap it up, and the faculty will still be faculty.